Hey, it's Sarah Burke here from the Women in Media podcast. And before we get started on a new episode, could I get you to hit like, follow, subscribe, hit the bell, whichever app you do your podcast listening in. Make sure you're all set up so you know when there's a new episode and you can help spread the word. Oh, and if you're so inclined, could I ask you to leave a review if the app that you're using does that? You're the best. All right, let's get to the show. I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media podcast. My next guest is a Canadian who got her first taste of the entertainment industry in Hong Kong, working in concert production with some pretty big names. She's been with Paquin Entertainment Group for over 15 years now, working in publicity, tour marketing, and management.
You know, there was times in my career of having been at Paquin for 15 and a half years where my eyes turned a little bit. And what really sort of clicked for me was I could go to a bigger management company. And what that would mean is probably I would be told what to sign. And I think the biggest lesson I learned, the biggest advice and the best advice was just like the currency of loyalty is invaluable. It's because I've been there for so long that I could go and live in Malta, or that I can sign whatever artist I want, and I've been given the latitude to build a management division.
My guest today is Michelle Szeto, who's now the vice president of Paquin's management division, living in Nashville. And how long have you been back? I know you've been on the road for most of the pandemic. I got back beginning of May, I think. So I've been here for a minute to like fully adjusted to what real life can be like. But I was actually back in Toronto last week for about 10 days, and it was hard going back to a more restricted place. I was going to say, like, you know, the first thing I'm so curious about is how you, I mean, there's lots of differences between the Canadian music industry and the American music industry, which we're going to get into. But, you know, you probably noticed a big change when you crossed our border.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, it's concerts have been happening here for a long time. In fact, like, you know, songwriter rounds have still been happening even as early as July of last year. So, which I think for a lot of my Canadian friends, Canadian industry friends, and, you know, it's just like, it seemed unfathomable that last July when things were not great, and it's not like they were great here either, but, you know, we were still doing listening rooms for songwriter rounds, and, you know, concerts have really, I have friends who've been to 5 concerts since March. So it is different. It is different. I think I didn't fully realize how hard the experience has been for my Canadian friends, having been in Nashville for the majority.
How long you been living in Nashville total?
You know, sort of carved out a really good life situation for myself. So I gave up my place in Toronto 2 years ago. Okay. But 2 years prior to that, I was basically living in Nashville for 8 months, in Toronto for 3 months, and in Europe for a month.
Amazing.
So that for 2 years, and then it just didn't make sense anymore. So I eventually gave up my place in Toronto 2 years ago. So sort of like in and out for the last 4 years.
I remember reading that announcement when you got, you know, the gig with the Homestead in Nashville. Did you have any reservations about doing Nashville almost full time?
No, not at all. And I think that I was really lucky that Paquin was really supportive. And really originally the first idea was like, hey, I'm going to go to Nashville for 3 months. And then 3 months later, I was like, I'm just going to stay for 3 more months. And I really eased myself into being down in Nashville full time. So I think had I done that from like 0 to 100, I think it would have been a lot harder of a transition. But also just so much of the business that I do and the business that my clients have are really out of the US. So, you know, I used to travel to Nashville a week or 2 weeks a month, plus going on tour with whoever. And, you know, sometimes I was gone 3 weeks a month. And it was just really, really hard to have a life. So my life is a lot easier.
A little more balanced.
Totally.
It also sounds like you maybe made this position for yourself, kind of. Am I on the right track there? How did the position come about? Because, you know, I was all like, rah, 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 when I saw the announcement, but maybe you can speak a little bit about what you were doing before you stepped into the Nashville role.
I mean, I've been at Paquin. Paquin's like the only job I've ever had. So I graduated from university. I had like one very short-lived job outside of the industry, and I've been at Paquin for 15 and a half years. So originally I was hired as a marketing person, really mostly for like corporate stuff for the company. And I was overseeing a lot of the family touring divisions. And then it's sort of like, I got pulled into the management stuff. So I started working with Buffy Sainte-Marie and Randy Bachman but really as a marketing and a publicity capacity for Jill, who manages Buffy and Randy. And then I started doing day-to-day for an artist, an Americana artist that Jill signed. And then slowly I was just like, I'm kind of tired of doing somebody else's bidding and not really having any autonomy. So then they were like, well, go sign your own artist. And then, so then I signed my own artist. And then
who was your first?
Donovan Woods.
Donovan Woods. Okay.
Yeah. So he was my first. And then really ever since then, as I've built the businesses and I've built sort of figured out, you know, sort of I run Donovan's label and I sort of have run labels for a lot of my artists. And as that kind of evolved, a lot of my contacts started being out of the US. And so I just asked one day, really. And that's it. I asked. That's how the position came to be.
No, I love that because a lot of the time we hear about women having these goals and, you know, maybe being too timid or too afraid to just say what they want and demand the respect. I only have known you for a couple of years. I think the first time I met you was actually backstage at the Junos in London, Ontario with Donovan.
Yeah, he was singing the In Memoriam.
Yes. Right. And I wanted to chat with him for my show, and he was nominated that year for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my first time meeting you. And like right away when I met you, like I was like, she means business. Like got that sense really early. Have you always, would you say, been as like confident as you sort of look when you first meet you? This is first impression I'm talking about, right? But we've had a chance to work together a little bit over the last few years.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I am actually an introvert, and I'm like very hardcore an introvert. So like 10 years ago, we did a corporate like upper management retreat where we had somebody come in and do a Myers-Briggs with everybody. And my results came back, and you sort of have a scale of introvert to extrovert. And it's like, I am as introverted as it comes. And I remember in the office with the rest of the upper management, they were really upset because they're like, you're not an introvert. Like, you're clearly not an introvert. I was like, I'm definitely an introvert. But I think I've definitely figured out how to, you know, it's like, you know, I think I'm good at what I do. I have gained a lot of knowledge and, you know, experience over the years. And I think that's allowed me to be more confident than I was. But I like, you know, it's like, I enjoy the interactions with people. And so I'm good at it and I've learned that skill of it, but it took me a long time. But really, I'm an introvert. So it's like, this is going to like knock me out for about 3 days. Where I'll have to like sit by myself in a dark hole or something to like recuperate from this conversation probably. So
I've dated an introvert, so I understand fully. And the recharge is the most important part for sure of all that. Okay. So take me back to like a moment in your career where like you remember first exercising like confidence, like just straight up knowing what you wanted, knowing what you needed to say, and like being completely comfortable in your own skin with it.
You know, I think that I've always been a really resourceful person. And I remember the first time that Paquin sent me to a conference. It's like, I had never been to a conference, period. And, you know, it's like, I didn't know how to meet people. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And then I got an email with the registrant list. And I think the first conference I went to, I think was probably Polestar, maybe. And I remember getting the registrant list, and it was just like everybody that was attending. And I was like, what do I do with this information? And so in my brain, I was like, well, I want to meet people, but I don't know who these people are. So I took a week where I researched every single person. I understood what their job was, what company they are, where they're based, what artists they work with. And I just emailed everybody. And for probably 3 years, as I was attending conferences, I did that every single time. And I just met with everybody. And I was just not afraid to meet with everybody. Because you just don't know who knows who, you don't know what they know, you don't know what you have to gain as far as just like building a relationship or just meeting new people. So when I did that, and really then I started going to conferences and realizing like, oh my God, I know a lot of people. And I think the safer and the more secure you feel in new environments, I think you sort of just like walk in a little bit with a little bit of a different attitude. So even though those were like really hard years of meeting a lot of people and doing a lot of research. Like when you have a registrant list of 300 people, it took me a really long time to go through. But it was so pivotal to me feeling like I wasn't a newbie. And it's like, I had to take the steps to learn that.
And some people might have just been able to like show up and like head, to one of the places they know registrants would be gathering and like start up a conversation. But your level of comfort was, I need to know who you are first.
Yeah. And also like, I am just better as a one-to-one person. Like I'm not comfortable in groups. My magic number is like 3. Nice. And anything more than like 3 additional people other than me, like I tend to sort of like clam down a little bit. So I just know I'm better one-on-one. So I sort of set myself up to allow myself to meet everybody. And also it's just like people who are also interested in meeting me, not knowing who I was. Some of those people have turned, have positions of real significance in like major companies. And it's like, those are the people that I came up with, which has been really exciting too, to watch that tide change.
What about like a full circle moment from one of those people that ended up being someone like so valuable to you? I'm sure there's tons, but maybe pick an example of like someone that came in very handy, and had you not done that, you wouldn't have even known them.
Yeah. Probably the most pivotal person. And I mean, I say that, and also just like, I have no idea what their name is anymore because it's been a long time since we spoke. But I remember when I first started working with Donovan, we had sort of gone through the process of looking for labels, and we just weren't particularly happy with some of the offers that we're getting. It didn't feel right. And I remember Donovan saying to me, like, let's just do this on our own. Like, let's just get a distribution deal. And this was 6 years ago. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like, I had to go look up everything you need to know about the music business and like read to be like, what is a distribution deal? Like, what does the deal look like? And there was a person that I'd met at a conference who was the head of distribution at E1. And I had met him in passing. He was really, really nice and super just like supportive. And I called him after Donovan and I had that conversation. And I was like, listen, like, this is what my artist says. I don't understand what this means. And he basically talked me through the entire process and told me like what the deals look like, how we could do this, why it would be beneficial. And
what to stay away from too, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think had I not had somebody who, at the time he was just like the president of like North America, it's just like, he didn't need to give me the time. Like, he didn't owe it to me. We weren't working together. I wasn't even like suggesting that we work together on this, but he gave me the time of the day. And I think that's like that, now understanding distribution, now also having really found a really good business and being the label for my artist, I wouldn't have done that without him. And I wouldn't have done that without Donovan pushing me to do that.
Okay. How about you and Donovan? Tell me the story of how that all came to be.
So he was already signed to the agency at the time. And so I had just started, they were like, go find a client. And I'd been listening to Donovan for a little while. I was sort of like 2 records deep into his catalog. And I just emailed his agent and was just like, can you just set us up? And we just like have a drink? And we met twice. And, Donovan is such a, like an important and sort of like, he's such an important client to me because he really sort of bought into a person who also had no real experience. Right. And we met, and he really was very specific where he's just like, I'm interested in working with a manager who's a woman, because he was, and I so appreciate that. And I think I appreciate from his perspective, he's like, I know I'm going to have to talk to you 30 times a day. And I don't want to talk to a dude 30 times a day. I don't want to talk to a woman 30 times a day, because just our demeanor and our temperament is simply different. And I think it was the first time when I heard somebody say that so like plainly, I understood what he meant, but I had never considered how different that would be for somebody like him. So yeah, so his agent set us up. We had a couple meetings, and I remember I was on the road with Buffy Sainte-Marie at a non-com conference, and it emailed me and was just like, I'd love to work together. He's just like, and how do you pronounce your last name? And it's just, yeah. And we've just been working together ever since. And yeah, I mean, he's my first client. So he has that spot in my heart.
He's so sarcastic too. I wonder, like, I mean, I remember my first time meeting him and like figuring out my way around his damn sarcasm. I'm wondering how you do that as a manager. Like, half the time you probably have to check, like, did you really mean that before I get back to them? Or
I honestly, like, we have such a good back and forth. And I think one of the things that's made our relationship really successful is we joke around a lot, like probably to the point where sometimes we're like, do people think we're annoying? Like, especially with some of the social posts where he uses me as the butt of the joke.
Oh, what was the recent one with the graphic design or something?
Yeah.
He's like joking. He's like, I told my manager I'm using this, something like that. And then she says that we have people to do this for me, but I like this.
Yeah. And he was like, I guarantee you like 1,000 likes and like 50 comments. And I was like, and there was more to that thread we didn't get to post, but I basically was like, okay, if you don't get 1,000 likes and 50 comments, we'll never have this conversation again. And so when he got the numbers, I was like, God damn, like
Donovan.
Yeah, but it's great. Like, you know, he's just one of those people, you know, and I think it comes with wisdom, and I think it just comes with age and not being precious. But we've really figured out this dance of, we know when it's more important to the other person and we know when not to push. So it's like, if I feel something is important to him, I'm happy to back down because I trust him, and vice versa. So, but we also like joke around a lot. I also like, you know, sometimes he comes to me wanting a little bit of pat on the back, and sometimes like I'll withhold it, and sometimes I'll give it to him. Like, he doesn't know when it's coming. And I think it's good for a working relationship that it's like, it's not just me being like, you're so great. And sometimes I'm like, you're fine.
You got to work for it too, right?
Yeah. That's right.
How about like biggest lesson learned from working with Donovan since he's your biggest longtime client?
I think it's ownership of masters. I think it really has proven to be incredibly valuable for us. You know, over the years, he's had a lot of people offer him pretty significant chunks of change to want to take over the business, particularly on his recording artist side. And we've held really firm in owning the masters and being our own label. And you know, I think Donovan now has a business, especially, you know, as a streaming artist and as somebody who obviously tours, and that's been so stable. Like, that's especially through the pandemic, and not even just Donovan, like, you know, even Wild Rivers, for example. It's like they're two artists that stream quite well. And it provided them both so much financial stability throughout the pandemic, where we also have funding, and there's a lot of things in Canada that's super helpful and like really supportive of artists. But I also have friends who are in the US who have like US artists who don't necessarily have the funding support. And I remember just like often people calling me to be like, I have a client who doesn't know how to pay for groceries next week. Like, and I had a bunch of artists and a bunch of manager friends who had that same conversation, that we discussed. And I think through the pandemic, had that have been a concern for me, that Donovan couldn't pay his mortgage, or if like Wild Rivers or any of my clients couldn't get groceries, the pandemic would have been way worse for me to bear that responsibility. And so because they own their masters and because they have good streaming numbers, it gave them a level of financial stability in a really difficult time. And it allowed us to be more creative. It allowed us to take more risks. And it also allowed us to care for our community in a little bit of a different way. You know, we did sort of like, Donovan gave out gift cards for groceries, you know, because we could. And, you know, I know, you know, we were fortunate to do that. And we wanted to do it because he has such stability, but we're watching other people having a harder time. So, you know, to be in a position to give back during a pandemic felt really rewarding. So it was really, owning your masters, owning your IP, it's, you know, it might not feel like anything now, but it's like betting yourself, you know?
Yeah, totally. So Wild Rivers is another one of your clients. You talked about being on the road with Buffy. What about another very important lesson for your career that came from a totally different client?
Yeah, I think Wild Rivers probably, you know, they're a band that I knew early on that we were going to have to go into a label, and it just made sense for the trajectory and where this band was going to go and the resources that we would need for this band to really accelerate and kind of move to the next level. But when I first started working with them, and this would have been like maybe 4 years ago, I think a lot of times young artists will come and just be like, I need a label, I need this, I need that. And it's just like checklists of things that they believe they're supposed to accomplish. And I remember they were like, we need to get a label. And I was like, just give me 18 months. Like, just give me 18 months to build the value of this and to sort of get it to a point where we can build a little bit more interest. And so I was like, just give me 18 months. And at that point, they were streaming fairly well. I think there were about 400,000 monthly listeners, specifically on Spotify. And so I was just like, just let me do this. And so we did on our own. And at that time, we're already getting label offers. I just knew that I could get more. So they gave me 18 months. We did it ourselves. We did a distribution deal that included some advance for marketing dollars. And 18 months later, because of what we built, because we were patient, because we believed in what we were building, all the offers then came in 300% higher.
Love 18 that.
Months. And I'm so thankful that they trusted the process and that they also understood that like the difference of 18 months of what it can do and also investing in yourself. I think it's just like another lesson of if you believe it, then like be a little bit more patient. If you can't, like if you have the luxury of that, obviously like because they were streaming well, they were already making some money.
Mm-hmm.
So we had, you know, it afforded us the ability to take that time. But I'm glad that they trusted that, you know, 18 months, like the offers weren't going to get worse. So let's just give it 18 months to see if we can do it better. And, you know, they're a band that's selling out shows across the US.
I'm so proud of them. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. Like, it's amazing that this band hasn't really toured that much in the US. Like, they've played Chicago 3 times and now they're playing, you know, a 1,200 capacity venue. You know, they've never played Boulder, Colorado, but we just added a second show at a 600 capacity venue. It's like,
okay,
who are these kids? Like, it's amazing. And I'm so happy for them.
Yeah. And like for context, I feel like when I first interviewed them too, like for one of our SiriusXM channels, they were like fresh out of school. Like,
yeah.
So the patience thing also plays a role here and like just a little more life experience even too.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And they're a group of people that are really interested in the business as well. And they've really sort of taken the time. And I remember when I first started managing them, I made them chase me around for a little bit because I wasn't ready. Like I just wasn't ready to sign a band that was that new. But I really appreciated and respected like the way they hustled and were holding their business. And they have a very strong vision for what they're trying to do. And it's been amazing to watch them grow, especially internationally. That's been really, really exciting for us.
So as VP of the management division at Paquin, does that mean that other artist managers report to you?
So yeah, you sort of asked that at an interesting time because we're in a major growth period right now.
Yeah.
So up until this point, it's been like we have 5 support staff between 2 managers. We've had a couple of managers sort of in and out in the last little bit, but we're definitely at a point right now where we are actively onboarding people. So not today, but imminently. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Cause I was going to say it's one thing to manage an artist, but it's another thing to manage other people managing artists as well. The music industry is a really fun place, right? You know, there's shows and events and all this stuff. But when it comes to sitting at the laptop and doing business, what's something maybe sort of new that you really had to learn and get more comfortable with as a VP?
Yeah, I think that like as for, you know, up until last fall when I was, you know, my title was just like artist manager, it's easy to kind of take a little bit of a passive role. And when it comes to operational, you know, strategy, I think I was always like, well, that's not really my problem, or like, that's not my thing, you know, and I'm still learning to have to step forward where, again, just like trying to be a little bit less passive because that's been my role for a very long time. And I have an invested interest in things growing. I have a vested interest in there being more managers. And I think also with the way that my career has grown last little bit, you know, a lot of new potential clients are coming across my desk. And right now it's like, I have a roster of 6 artists myself, plus obviously my support team, but I'm getting really exciting opportunities that are being sent to me. And oftentimes if I'm competing for new clients, you know, it's like I'm competing against some of the very best. You know, I'm not going to name names, but like I recently lost a client to like a very big manager out of the US. And, you know, and that's been happening a little bit more frequently, which is great, but also at a certain time, it doesn't feel great, you know? So as more opportunities are kind of coming across my desk, it's up to me to think about, okay, well, it means that I need more managers. And how do I find these managers? Like, where are they located? It's definitely a little bit harder being in Nashville, trying to navigate that. But thankfully, part of our long view is also, I want managers out of the US and I want a couple managers out of Canada. But I've never had to really think about, I can have the idea that I want these people, but I've just definitely had to be more proactive in finding out who these people are, and just taking more of initiative. And it's not really what I'm good at or necessarily where my interest lies, but I think it's also because I just don't know what I don't know at this point. So as I'm getting a little bit more familiar with finding people and what, all of it just comes down to what my vision is, the vision and what's important to me. And what's important to me is having a management company that has a diverse roster. So it's like, it means that I need to find managers with diverse rosters. And so it's been really fun, but also very daunting and time consuming.
Okay. So that's like maybe one of the least favorite parts right now. What about like what's one of your favorite parts about your position?
I think it's I think it's really feeling like the thing that's being built is based on a vision that I share with Julian at the company and Jill and Todd and Megan, who are the owners of the company. So feeling like they've really deferred to me as what is my vision for the management company. And I think it's just a recognition that like I am a big part of it and I'm sort of like the core of it in addition, working with Jill. And so I think that's the really fun part, is just like, in the same way that I carved out this position for myself, in the same way that I got myself to Nashville, what this management company could look like in 2 years or in 4 years is up to me. And I think that's really thrilling and that's really exhilarating to be like, this is your chance. Like, you can't say that you're not where you want to be, or you can't say that the company isn't what you want it to be, because I have a chance to build it exactly how I want, which is not an opportunity that I think a lot of people get. So I'm definitely very thankful for it.
What would you say is the proudest moment of your career so far?
Oh,
it can be anything.
I think that this was a while ago, and this was when I was working more with Buffy. But I remember accompanying her show at the Beacon Theater. It was, I think, the 75th birthday for Wavy Gravy. And I showed up with Buffy, and everybody was like, we were late to sound check because our flight was late. But we walked in and there was Dr. John, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, Jackson Brown, Ani DeFranco. And I remember just walking in with her and just like the sheer love and respect that these people that I love and respected had for this artist that I was walking in with. It just really sort of like made my head kind of explode to be like, I know Buffy is the woman who calls me when my heart is broken and she like gives me advice, and she's this woman that I'm so proud to work with. But I think the reality of being like, oh my God, who she is in the grand scheme of things with these people was pretty mind blowing. And I don't know that I'll have an experience that will ever match that day with Buffy at the Beacon Theater.
Okay, I know we already talked about some of your lessons learned, but you gotta have learned something epic from Buffy too.
I think the thing that I always take away with Buffy, and the thing that anytime people meet her, interview her, or how, for whatever reason that they come across her, I have heard probably 5 to 10 times where people say, meeting Buffy, that moment changed like the day for them, or changed a mood for them, and that she's just such like a light, she's like a human being just like full of light, and she's not doing anything that's different to any of us other than that is her character. And I think that is so important and so valuable to me, where she's like somebody like Buffy who's had the career that she's had, both the ups and the downs, but for her to just like, she will listen to you. Like if she's talking to you, no matter who you are, she wants to know your name. She wants to know if you're okay. She wants to know like where you're from. And, it's like, and for her to take that time with every single person she meets, I think was just really important to know how much that means to people.
It's like it's a grounding reminder in this business.
Yeah,
yeah,
totally. And if Buffy Sainte-Marie can do it, if Buffy Sainte-Marie has time for it,
anyone does.
Yeah, that's right.
I have her book on my nightstand right now.
Oh, good. You're sort of like in the middle of it?
I'm every time I say I'm going to read, I don't read. I have trouble like concentrating with all the things going on right now, but I'm trying. Yeah, I'm only like 2 chapters in.
You got it.
And I've been saying that for the longest time too.
In this pandemic, I've read 54 books.
Oh my gosh.
That is more books than I've read in 12 years. So you got it.
Okay, well, now that we're on to that, so you read a lot of books because you were kind of on your own, doing your own thing. Tell me a little bit about how having so much freedom in your job to work remotely anyway had allowed you during the pandemic to sort of park it wherever you wanted it.
And it's funny because, obviously there was no touring, but honestly and truly, last 18 months has been the busiest 18 months of my entire career. I had like 14 releases in 12 months, including like albums and singles and whatnot. But I was very lucky that I worked for a company that I've been with for a very long time. And so they were very trusting. My clients were very trusting. So I went and lived in Malta for 4 months because I could. And, originally I was going for 5 weeks, and then I got there and I was like, nothing is closed. Like nothing is happening anywhere. I wasn't taking meetings. I wasn't missing out on anything. So I just stayed. I just stayed and I stayed and I stayed. And then I overstayed my visa. I just worked out of there and I worked really hard. At the same time, I took 28 vacation days while I was out there. And the rest of the time I worked on my own schedule. So it was amazing. And it definitely, not a single person, not a client, not anybody at the company ever questioned it. I think they just, and it's when I came into 2020, I had 48 vacation days.
That sounds a lot like me when I'm rolling into a new year. It's like, I'm allowed to carry over 5? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And they were like, you have to take it. I was like, okay, you want me to take like 7 weeks off? And it just seemed impossible. And then I got to Malta. I was like, oh, I can do this. I could take a bunch of time off. Yeah. So I was just, I was lucky where I'm efficient at my job. My clients trusted me. I was very clear when I was taking days off. And turns out you can work anywhere in whatever time zone you choose.
Was there anything specific that brought you to Malta?
It was because Canada. So what I had to do was I had to fly from Nashville to Toronto. I had to quarantine in Toronto because I had to enter Malta from Canada because Canada was on the list of the amber countries that were allowed into Malta. And so there was 5 countries that as long as I had a negative PCR test, I didn't have to quarantine. So it was like Iceland, Greece, Malta, like Bulgaria, and one other place. But I had been to Malta before. I was there for like 10 days a few years ago. So I just knew what I was getting into. I knew what the island was like. I knew enough about the neighborhoods that I knew what I was going to get into. And also the cases were really low.
Yeah.
So I just went to Malta. Because people weren't traveling, it's like I got to experience a lot of places where I had previously seen photos of, like St. Peter's Pool, for example, which was sort of the south part of the island. And anytime I've ever seen photos of St. Peter's Pool, just rained, like hundreds and hundreds of people. But because I was going through a pandemic, I was usually like the only person there. I just knew that being there at this moment in time, I will never have this experience again. I just did what I needed to do, and everybody was really chill about it, thankfully.
So when I was reading your bio, you started your career in Hong Kong, working in the industry. What was that like?
I was 16, so I was like a runner. I was born in Hong Kong, and I lived in Hong Kong between like 2 sort of different formative years in my life. But I was born there. We moved to Toronto when I was 4. We moved back to Hong Kong when I was 11. I was there until I was 17. So during the time that I was in Hong Kong, I love music, but I really love like Brit pop in particular. So I ended up meeting somebody at like a Boyzone signing at HMV or somebody, and like his brother does production for Midas Concert Promotions, which is like a promoter out in Hong Kong and Singapore. And I just met him at a signing, and he was like, "Do you want to be a runner?" And so like me and my best friend at the time just started being runners at shows. And so it was just like, from zero experience of being backstage with Oasis and Prodigy and like Boyz II Men and Celine Dion, like it was so wild. But honestly, it was never part of what I wanted to do. Like from like grade 7, when the teacher was like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Like I was on a very different path. Like I wanted to be a child therapist specializing with children, refugee kids.
So specific.
I was like grade 7, and I was like, I got it under control. I know what's happening. So it just like was a fun thing that we were doing for a really long time. And, you know, we sort of did some promo stuff where we handed out flyers at malls and that kind of thing. But it was really amazing to see the entire operation, especially at a concert like Oasis. You know, it was just like to watch all the parts that went into it, to meet the promoters. It just wasn't even a world that you just don't think about what goes into.
And let me guess, the Oasis manager made you want to be a manager.
I didn't want to be a manager until like 6 years ago.
I know, I'm just kidding. I was just thinking like, oh my God, that poor manager between Liam and Noel.
Oh my God. And I remember they were like, Liam and Noel had just come out, and I was part of like the crew that were picking them up. And I remember somebody was just like, "Hey, Noel wants to go shopping. Like, and they were just like, can you sort of go with him?" And I was like 16, and I was like,
"Oh, you want me to take him to the mall? No problem."
I think I made a kind of a joke about the size of his head, not realizing that he was in earshot and completely being uncouth. And he heard me, and he gave me a look, and then I wasn't allowed Noel for the rest of the day. So the reminder here is people can hear you when you say things.
That's a very early lesson learned. Look at that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about returning to Hong Kong for any work, or that's not something you're interested in?
No, it's not a thing that I'm interested in. Just culturally, I'm pretty disconnected from what Hong Kong is today versus what it was like when I lived there. But I have friends that I grew up with that are recording artists in Hong Kong who are like on Warner Music. And so it's really cool to sort of have an understanding of what they're doing in a completely different market. And we've also tried where it's like my friend Jill is a really big fan of Donovan's, and just because she's seen me post about him, so she started following him. And so like we've talked about doing collaborations, or like maybe he'll help him write. So it's like that bridging of that gap is really, really awesome. Recently, I was on an AAPI panel here that was set up by Nashville Musical Quality, and it was really interesting because when they first reached out to me about being on this panel, you know, jokingly, I was like, I don't know 5 Asian people in the Nashville music community. I'm like, where have they found these people?
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting conversation, and really through that, and they obviously posted it online. I also then have since had people reach out to me who watched the panel, and it's been really, really awesome to see people who are also in the AAPI community reach out, and us like now getting to build a little bit of a community. But I would say that it hasn't necessarily been a big part of the conversation. I think I do certainly want to acknowledge that as all the hate crimes are happening around Asians in the last 18 months, and obviously, you know, with the Atlanta shooting here, I think I realized that I sometimes enabled behavior towards Asians, and, you know, specifically where it's like, I've made a lot of jokes in my life.
I come from a Jewish background, and I've been making jokes the whole time.
Yeah. And I just realized when when you're like, what do I need to do? I'm the only Asian here. Or like, you know, I'm in the hotel lobby. Like, I'm the only Asian. Like, I've made that joke many a times, and I didn't realize what I was contributing by being so flippant about my culture. It sort of like allowed people to also be flippant about my culture because they've watched me be flippant about the culture. And so I think that really up until this point, up until participating in the AAPI panel, up until the hate crimes, up until the Atlanta shooting, it was something that I probably thought I just didn't think about it with any sort of seriousness. So I'm really glad I did the panel. It was a really challenging panel for me. And it was also interesting because we had like 2 men and 3 women on the panel. And even more specifically, hearing the difference of the male Asian experience and the female Asian experience was just something that maybe I was a little bit naive to. But I learned a lot. As hard as it was and as much as I didn't enjoy the panel, I took a lot away from it.
Have you ever had like a racist experience?
You know, it's hard to say whether I was discriminated against because I'm a woman or because I'm Asian or because I was younger then. So I don't really always know what was the factor in it. But, I've certainly often been thought of, when I'm at a show, it's like people often think that I'm the girlfriend or the assistant. Oftentimes when I used to go to conferences, people thought I was like the secretary. It's like, who even uses that word anymore? But this was a long time ago. This was like 10 years ago. But I've definitely been people have assumed that my role was not in a position of power or a position of authority. But
and you're like, I'm running this office now, by the way.
But it's like, I don't know at the time. I'm like, is your problem with me that I'm Asian, or is it that I'm a woman, or that I'm young? Like it's kind of got a little bit of everything that's made it complicated. But I think it's easy for women to not necessarily be taken seriously all the time. I think, I'd like to think that that's changed compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I started. But I've had more issues of just being in the community of being Asian versus like the music industry. So
has there been like a mentor, female or male, who has contributed to your confidence and your accomplishments over the span of your career?
I mean, I definitely would say that, Julian and Todd and Jill within the company they gave me chances that they didn't have to. Jill let me work on Buffy Sainte-Marie when he didn't have to, and I was only a year into the job. And so I think like when it comes to that, while there were some things that I sort of missed, where it's like, I feel like I learned how to be a manager on my own because I didn't have a mentor. But at the same time, I was given such tremendous security and stability in the company that I work with. And I'm sort of like, I'm not blowing smoke. I don't think they'll even watch this, so it's fine. But like between you, me, and whoever is listening, and I think it's actually very interesting because I've recently done a lot of mentorship, like managerial mentorships with.
That's when I was going there next. I was like, she's got to be mentoring someone. Yeah.
Yeah, so it really kind of started last summer around the Black Lives Matter. And I was trying to figure out, like, what can I do? Like, what is it that I have to offer people? And I'm like, I have time and I'm a manager. So I basically have put out a call out through a couple of my groups where I just said, if you're a BIPOC manager and you're working independently and you just need somebody to talk to, whether it's to bounce ideas off or you're not sure how to, if you're not sure what this looks like or whatever, reach out. And and so every Thursday I do 3 hours of one-on-ones with BIPOC managers. And I think because I didn't have that, it's been really important for me to give back in that way. And again, like I really focus on BIPOC managers more than anything else because there's not enough hours in the day to help like everybody. But I just know how difficult it was when I was trying to figure stuff out. And sometimes the industry can be pretty gatekeepery. So if I can shed a little bit of light on the DSP process, if I could shed a little bit of light of like, how distribution deals work or like what kind of levels of deals that you could look for. I have that. And it's like, I like to hear myself talk too. So it's been really, really great to do that. I hope that people feel the same who've spoken to me. But because I didn't have that, it was important for me to offer up time and opinion.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So it's been great. It's been equally as rewarding for me. And I've also discovered some really great artists through this process. So it's been.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, totally.
What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given in your career?
Best piece of advice I've ever been given. I think that loyalty is really valuable. I think that early on, you know, there was times in my career of having been at Paquin for 15 and a half years where my eyes turned a little bit, where I was like, oh, what about that? Or like, what if I did that job? Or like, what about that company? And I remember talking to somebody, and they were just like, you just have to figure out what's important to you in 10 years. And what really sort of clicked for me was I could go to a bigger management company. And what that would mean is probably I would be told what to sign. I would probably be told what artists I can and cannot work with, or be given an artist. Or I would have, like, every time I go to a new company, that maybe I would have 15 vacation days, but I probably have to push for it. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from the biggest advice and the best advice was just like, the currency of loyalty is invaluable. You know, it's like, because I've been in a company for 15 and a half years, I've had 4 different jobs in the company. It's because I've been there for so long that I could go and live in Malta for 4 months, or that I can sign whatever artist I want. And I've been given the latitude to build a management division. So as I oftentimes get resumes from people and I look at, you know, they're there for a year and a half, they're there for 2 years, or there for a year, it's not appealing for me to hire somebody like that. So I think the best advice is, if the situation was good and that there was opportunities and you sort of like the people that you worked with and you respected the ethos of the company, by having somebody say to me, loyalty will what that will mean for you in 5 or 10 years is going to change your life. And I really believe that served me really, really well.
Loyalty is currency.
I really believe that. And I think I'm a better manager because I did the marketing, because I did the tour marketing, because I did a day-to-day, because I've worked with the agency. I believe I'm a better manager because of it. And I wouldn't have gone to do that if it weren't for sticking it out. And, you know, and I did a panel recently, and I was like, if I'm being honest, I probably hated the first 6 years of my job. And I didn't hate it at the time, but in retrospect, I hated it.
Yeah.
But those 6 years, the foundation that I got, the things that I learned, just make me better at what I do. And I'm glad that I didn't go and take that job 3 years into Paquin, you know, or 9 years into Paquin, or 13 years into Paquin, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and I wouldn't enjoy the people that I work with the way that I do.
So we've heard some names that at least I recognize in this conversation so far, but you actually have a couple American signings as well. And I think that's huge for a Canadian gal that, recently moved down to Nashville. Tell me about your American signings and some of your new clientele.
Yeah. So I have a writer-producer named Logan Wall. He's actually in a lot of the credits with Donovan. And that's how Logan and I originally connected. He signed in Water Chapel as well. So he's been a really, most of my artists, or most of my clients, are all artists and touring artists or songwriters. So to have a writer producer and Logan, I always get that mixed up, but having like Logan as like a writer producer, it's just a different part of the brain. But it's also just really been fun. And I think it's also truly been a bit of a challenge where, because I have American clients, we don't have the safety net of funding. And so it's like, it is harder, but I think it's also been a little bit more rewarding, because it's just like, whatever we accomplish is really because of like our own efforts, or like being a little bit crafty. And then I have another client that I just signed in January. His name is Raitiere. Aaron is known to be a songwriter. He's been a successful songwriter for some time. He won a Grammy. He won a Grammy last year. He wrote 3 songs for A Star Is Born soundtrack. And one of them he won, that Lady Gaga sang, and she also wrote, she co-wrote with a few others. And but Aaron's also had cuts with like Anderson East and Miranda Lambert and Midland and lots of other people. And now we're working on this artist project for him, and it's this beautiful, beautiful record that I'm so excited for people to hear. But it's produced by Miranda Lambert and Anderson East. And the cast of characters on this record is bananas. Like, it is just the wildest group of people, of like guest vocalists, guest writers. So I'm really proud of working on this project with Aaron. I think he's exceptional. He's like, he went to Cornell on a swimming scholarship and moved to Nashville, was like living in a van for a really long time, and then started, Brent Cobb, actually, I remember Aaron telling me that Brent Cobb one day was just like, I don't want to write with Music Row people. Like, I want to write a guy with somebody who like lives in a van and like kind of homeless.
Like, I got a guy.
Yeah. And Aaron, somebody was just like, oh, there's a guy who just came into town who lives in his van. And Aaron started writing a lot. And that was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But then, fast forward, he wins a Grammy for a song that Lady Gaga co-wrote and sang. And now we're about to put out this record in a little while. And I'm super, super pumped about it. There's Devan, who's of Wild Rivers. She's the lead singer, and she's got this indie pop project, which is really, really fun to watch her like stretch herself. And then the last artist that I just signed that actually Donovan and I found together is a young woman out of Winnipeg, Cassidy Mann. We came across her where he was a mentor on a song camp and I was a jury on the song camp, and we both independently heard her stuff and both sent it to each other.
Hilarious how that works too, eh?
Yeah. And she's really, really exceptional. So Donovan and I are working with her together, which is new for us as well. But I'm really, really excited about her. I think she's going to be really special.
We're going to link to everyone. We'll throw links in the episode notes if anyone wants to check out any of the artists that we've been talking about. But yeah, like you're keeping it interesting, and how cool that like you and Donovan can even collaborate in a different way now. That's awesome, because he's like, that person from the beginning of all of this, and now it's coming around full circle.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Let's check it out in a year and see if things are still working. So, but no, it's great.
Before we wrap, I left you with a little homework. I said I would be asking you for some names of women who you think should come on this podcast and tell their stories. Who came to mind?
First of all, my dear friend, Katie Jellin. Katie is the director of sync and licensing at Warner Chappell, Nashville. Katie went to law school, then she was an artist manager before she went into sync and licensing. And I tend to find people who've moved around in the industry before they landed where they land tend to be really interesting, and they tend to have really good insight and really good wisdom about the business. So I think that Katie would be a wonderful person to share her stories, and she definitely has some strong opinions, and I love and respect, and she's just amazing, just a wonderful person that I think could share a lot. And then the second person I would say is Lindsay Myers. I work with Lindsay on Wild Rivers. She is the band's agent, one of 4 agents on our client team. And Lindsay didn't necessarily, know forever as a kid or as a teenager what she wanted to do, and she didn't necessarily have her eyes set on being in the music industry, which is definitely something that resonates with me as somebody who also sort of fell into the industry. And I think that being an agent is even a more male dominated part of the business. So I think Lindsay, being a really great agent and works with really great artists, probably has some really great stories to tell as well. And, and Lindsay works with artists such as Lennon and Kesha, and among many others, and just somebody that I've always really respected and really thrilled to be working with. So, and the last person that I would nominate would be one of my dearest friends, Joanne Setterton. Joanne founded the PR agency in Canada, Indoor Recess. And then she moved into management maybe 8 to 10 years ago, something like that. But she's somebody who has worked with artists that have had tremendous international success. And I think that perspective and the stories that come with working with bands who are not only big in Canada, but also big and internationally, just comes with hardship and tremendous highs. And I think that she would have some really great stories to share as well.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for being so forthcoming about all your lessons learned.
Thank you.
And hopefully we see each other at a show where we last left off. I think the last time I saw you was at the Danforth Music Hall the week before everything shut down.
It's Rose Cousins.
Cousins. When's your next trip to Toronto?
Maybe November.
Okay. There's tons of shows in November and December planned, yeah.
Yeah, and otherwise Donovan's doing his Massey Hall debut, so I'll definitely be back for that.
Definitely check out the episode notes for Michelle Szeto if you want to learn more about the artist who she works with and discover some really great music. While you're there, if you haven't hit subscribe on the Women in Media podcast yet on your favorite podcast service, I would really appreciate it. Even better, if you've got time to leave me a little review, that helps eyes and ears get on this podcast as well. Until next episode, thank you so much for listening.
A woman of ill repute is a person who's found success in non-traditional ways, often risking the disapproval of society. They're usually fearless, and more often than not, they're quite funny. They're certainly interesting, and sometimes inspirational. I'm Maureen Holloway, and along with my friend, noted broadcaster Wendy Mesley, we talk to these women on our podcast, and we call it Women of Ill Repute. You might like it. Lots of people do. And all you have to do is listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or you could go to our website at womenofillrepute.com. That's kind of our online home. And while you're there, it wouldn't hurt you to sign up for our newsletter. I'm just saying.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.